faithfully conveying value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'm interpreting the book A Brief History of Chinese Fiction for you. This is a classic social science work. The author is the renowned modern writer and thinker Lu Xun. Oh, everyone knows him. His original name is Zhou Shiren, a leading figure in 20th century literature. In many people's eyes, Lu Xun is a fierce cultural warrior, adept at using novels and essays to dissect the nation's shortcomings. But actually, he was also a scholar. His representative works include Call to Arms, Hesitation, Old Tales Retold, Wild Grass, collections of novels and essays, as well as academic works like A Brief History of Chinese Fiction. A Brief History of Chinese Fiction is Lu Xun's only long academic monograph, representing his highest academic achievement. At the same time, it's the first book to systematically introduce the history of Chinese fiction. Before this, research on Chinese fiction was fragmented. As Lu Xun said, Chinese fiction has never had a history, which determined him to write this book. Lu Xun had no ready-made content to learn from, so he had to pioneer it himself, and he expended tremendous effort. The book was officially published in 1924, but the collection and organization of materials started as early as 1912. Over those 11 or 12 years, Lu Xun spent almost all his leisure time in various libraries in Beijing. He collected materials on ancient fiction, organized his creative ideas, revised draft after draft to perfect it, finding a thread through the chaotic works. So, why did Lu Xun go to such great lengths to write a book on the history of ancient fiction development? There are two reasons for this. First, to change the long-standing dismissive attitude towards fiction. In ancient China, fiction had high achievements, but its status was always very low. In the eyes of ancient people, fiction was leisure books, miscellaneous books, for passing time, and hard to enter the hall of elegance. Under the influence of this view, research on fiction history was basically barren. The most direct purpose of Lu Xun's book is to help people understand the value of ancient fiction and change their dismissive attitude towards it. Second, it's to promote Lu Xun's social critique thoughts and achieve his goal of improving society and enlightening life. Influenced by Western concepts like human liberation, literature, and human studies, Lu Xun highly valued the social function of fiction. He believed that good fiction could play a role in improving society and enlightening the masses. Therefore, in A Brief History of Chinese Fiction, Lu Xun also especially emphasized the social value of fiction, often evaluating it from a social critique perspective. The book consists of 28 chapters. It spans from the mythological period to the late Qing dynasty, fully narrating the evolution of ancient Chinese fiction. Lu Xun believed that the development of Chinese fiction basically follows three evolutionary laws. So what are they? First, in subject matter, from writing about gods to writing about people. Second, in creation, from non-conscious to conscious. Third, in language, from classical Chinese to vernacular Chinese. When writing this book, he basically centered around these three laws. And moreover, he researched the social and ideological cultural reasons behind these laws. Combining these three laws, I'll divide it into four key points to narrate the book's content for you. The first key point is the origin of ancient fiction. The second key point is the evolutionary process of ancient fiction from writing about gods to writing about people. The third key point is the evolutionary process of ancient fiction from non-conscious creation to conscious creation. The fourth key point is the evolutionary process of ancient fiction from classical Chinese to vernacular Chinese. All right, let's first take a look at the first key point. The origin of ancient fiction mainly involves the history of fiction from the pre-Qin period to the Han Dynasty. There have always been many theories about its origin. A widely circulated view in ancient times is that fiction originated from folk street talks and alley discussions. For example, Ban Gu, an Eastern Han historian, believed fiction came from Bai Guan, collecting such talks. Bai Guan were a type of minor official in the pre-Qin period, specifically responsible for collecting folk street talks. The alley discussions were reported to the ruler so that the ruler could understand the people's sentiments. Angguan said that when the Beiguan collected people's street talks and alley discussions, it formed the earliest fiction. His view had a great influence. Later, people also used Baiguan as an alternative name for fiction. However, Lucian's view is different from the ancients. He believed ancient fiction originated from myths and legends. So why is that? Myths are explanations made by humans in ancient times for the changes in all things. In ancient times, human ancestors saw the endless changes in heaven and earth, but these phenomena far exceeded their capabilities. They couldn't understand, so they invented many explanations themselves. For example, the stories of Pangu separating heaven and earth and Nua refining stones to mend the sky are instances of ancient humans using their imagination to explain how the sky they looked up to every day was formed. The main characters in these stories are often various deities, so these tales are called myths by later generations, and myths gradually evolved. The protagonists shifted from gods to divine humans or ancient heroes with more human traits, giving rise to legends like Hao Yi shooting the suns and Chan Ye flying to the moon. Lu Xun believed that these myth and legend tales are peculiar, full of imagination, and became the source of later fiction. Currently, works preserving more myths and legends include Shan Haijing, Huainani, Tianwen by Ku Yuan, and others. For instance, Shan Haijing had the greatest influence on later times. And this book was originally a geography text, but many know it for its myths, like Kuafu, chasing the sun, Nua, mending the sky, Jingwei, filling the sea, Yu, the great, controlling floods, Huangdi, battling Chiyu, etc. These stories became creative material for many later novels. For example, Ming and Qing era supernatural novels and many popular online fantasy stories today show traces of Shan Haijing. Compared to Western Greek mythology, China's myth system isn't well developed. Few myths survive, and there's no complete pantheon. The reasons mainly two. First, the ancient Huacha people's cultural tradition valued practicality and disdained fantasy. Originating in the Yellow River Basin, the Huaxia people focused on farming. Folks were busy working all year, so they prized practical gains and neglected spiritual activities like fantasy, leaving myths little room to thrive. Another reason is Confucius's disdain. You might ask, what does Confucius have to do with myths not flourishing? Confucius's thought was pragmatic. He valued self-cultivation, family harmony, governing, and world peace. As Confucianism's founder, he didn't care much for spirits or ancient myths. Confucius prioritizing human affairs over spirits also contributed to myths' underdevelopment. Of course, myths are only fiction's origin, not fiction itself. Some fiction appeared during the Han Dynasty, but after research, Lucian concluded that genuine Han-era fiction is just what's been passed down and visible. Any works claiming to be Han Dynasty fiction are fake, so tracing ancient fiction's journey must start with Six Dynasties fiction. All right, that covers the first key point, the origin of fiction. Lucian believed ancient fiction originated from myths and legends, but Chinese mythology wasn't well developed due to the Chinese nation's emphasis on practicality and Confucius's opposition to discussing spirits. Okay, now let's move to the second key point, the evolutionary process of ancient fiction from writing about gods to writing about people. This evolution mainly occurred during the Wei Jin and Six Dynasties periods, reflected in literary works, especially in the early Six Dynasties. Xiguai fiction flourished initially, followed by the gradual emergence of Shiren fiction later. Z means recording. The development from gods to people is also the evolution from Ziguai to Ziren fiction. Now let's examine how this evolution happened in detail. Dui refers to supernatural spirits. Zhiguai fiction records tales of ghosts and deities. Regarding why Ziguai fiction became popular during the Six Dynasties, evolution analyzed that during this period, local Chinese mystical practices, shamanism, and imported Buddhism were all prevalent. Under these multiple influences, people widely believed in spirits and karma and enjoyed such stories. Thus, books recording supernatural beings became popular. Six Dynasties, Ziguai fiction included works by scholars like In Search of the Supernatural and Records of the Hidden and Visible Worlds, mainly documenting various supernatural tales. Others were by Buddhists and Taoists, like Records of Omens from the Unseen Realm and Records of Gleanings, primarily recounting Buddhist karma stories. Taoist immortal stories had a simple purpose: to deify and promote their religion. Among Six Dynasties, Zhiguai fiction, In Search of the Supernatural achieved the highest distinction. In Search of the Supernatural has rich content: myths, ghosts, resurrection tales, historical legends, and human marvels. This comprehensive collection includes stories like The Filial Son of the East Sea, Dan Yang's Daughter, and Ganzhang and Moye Forging Swords. These widely circulated stories became source material for later fiction, operas, and popular literature. For instance, the Yuan Dynasty opera, The Injustice to Due, originates from the filial son of the East Sea story. The Hongmei opera, Heavenly Match, adapts Dong Yang's Daughter, showing how Six Dynasties Ziguai fiction established a supernatural tradition. That is, writing about supernatural matters to illuminate human truths. This tradition greatly influenced later generations, with every dynasty producing Zhiguai works. Even today, we can see elements of Zhiguai in some novels and films. Having covered supernatural fiction, now let's discuss anecdotal fiction. If supernatural fiction focuses on deities, then anecdotal fiction centers on people. The concept anecdotal fiction was proposed by Lu Xun, specifically referring to Six Dynasties works recording people's words, deeds, and anecdotes, the earliest human-focused fiction. The finest example of Six Dynasties anecdotal fiction is A New Account of the Tales of the World. Lucian called it a textbook for scholars, as it records numerous words and deeds of Wei-Jin-era intellectuals. These scholars embodied unconventional, free-spirited styles highly admired then, like Wang Huiji's story of acting on impulse then returning when his mood faded, showing true scholarly spirit. Wang Huiji, fifth son of famous calligrapher Long Shiji, lived in Shanyin. One snowy midnight, he opened his window to admire the snow while drinking and reciting poetry. Suddenly remembering his friend Dai Kui, he longed to chat and play instruments with him, though Dai lived far away. Wang immediately ordered a boat, traveled all night, and arrived at Dai's doorstep at dawn. But Wang turned back without entering, returning to Shanyan. When asked why he didn't visit after reaching Dai's door, Wang Huji replied, "I came on a whim, and now my whim has faded. Why must I see Dai?" Meaning, he came spontaneously for enjoyment, and having satisfied that impulse, saw no need for formal meeting. Such capriciousness was seen as scholarly elegance then. A New Account of the Tales of the World contains many such concise, subtly written stories of high literary value. Besides this, works like Forest of Conversations, Popular Stories, Shell Shuo, and Forest of Filial Piety were also famous anecdotal fictions. Together, anecdotal and supernatural fiction advanced fiction's development. The shift from supernatural to anecdotal shows fiction had achieved. The transition from gods to humans to Lu Xun, this was major progress. Why? How is writing about people instead of gods progress? As mentioned, Lu Xun valued fiction's social role in reforming society and life. He believed fiction should evolve toward depicting life, making this his key criterion for evaluating ancient fiction. So the shift from writing about gods to people is a major advancement. But Lucian also pointed out that Six Dynasties fiction had clear flaws. What were they? Lack of conscious creative awareness. Fiction's basic artistic feature is fabrication. Recognizing this and actively creating fiction constitutes conscious creation. But Six Dynasties fiction lacked this characteristic. Looking at anecdotal fiction like a new account of the tales of the world, these notebook-style works recorded real people and events as factual accounts. As for supernatural fiction, people during the Six Dynasties generally believed ghosts, underworld, and hell were real. So even supernatural fiction authors didn't think they were writing fiction. They believed they were recording real events. Authors wrote fiction as truth. Readers read it as truth, showing a lack of conscious creation awareness, indicating fiction wasn't yet mature as a genre. So when did ancient fiction develop conscious creation awareness? This brings us to today's third key point. The evolution from unconscious to conscious creation was completed in the Tang Dynasty and strengthened during Song Yuan periods. Ancient fiction entered a conscious state, represented by Tang romance tales. Tang romance refers to classical Chinese short stories, popular in Tang Dynasty. Their emergence marks the formal formation of ancient Chinese fiction, immensely significant. Tang romance authors had conscious creation awareness. They knew they were writing fictional works, marking fiction's independence as a literary genre. Additionally, Tang romance saw major literary enhancements. Six Dynasties fiction was concise but brief, with sparse descriptions. Tang romance, expanded length, featured innovative plots, ornate language, and stronger literary quality. Among excellent Tang romances, Yuan Jin's The Story of Ying Ying was highly influential. Yuan Jin, a famous mid-Tang scholar and close friend of Bai Jui, together called Yuan Bai, wrote about scholar Zhang Sheng and maiden Kui Ying Ying's love story. Set during Jianyan era, scholar Zhang meets Kui Ying Ying and her mother at Pujiyu Temple. When war erupts, Zhang protects the Kui family. Ying Ying's mother hosts a banquet. Ying Ying thanks Zhang. Zhang, captivated, sends maid Hong Yang to arrange secret meetings, but never formally proposes, eventually abandoning Ying Ying to marry a noblewoman in Chang'an. At the end of the story, Zhang Shang defends his actions, saying, Ying Ying is a femme fatale who could harm people. He couldn't handle her, so he controlled his feelings and boasted that abandoning her was correcting a mistake. This story roughly matches Yuan Zhen's own experiences, and it's generally believed that Yuan Zhen is the prototype of Zhang Sheng. Although the ending of the story of Ying Ying is tragic, the character portrayals of Zhang Sheng and Ying Ying are very successful. It also includes romantic tropes like the scholar and the lady, expressing love through poetry, meeting in the garden, etc., which were widely borrowed by later scholar beauty novels and operas. After multiple adaptations, this story was finally solidified in The Romance of the Western Chamber. In The Romance of the Western Chamber, Zhang Sheng is no longer a heartless man. He's changed to a devoted lover, and the ending is a happy reunion which better suits Chinese preferences. Besides the story of Ying Ying, Tang romances have many popular stories like Song of Everlasting Sorrow, The Tale of Nie Yin Yang, etc. These stories are widely circulated and serve as a treasure trove for later artistic creations. For example, in 2015, the film The Assassin, directed by Hu Haxianjian, drew from the legend of Nie Yang. Classical Chinese fiction of the Song Yuan periods continued the path of Six Dynasties supernatural and um, Tang romances, with many novels and collections appearing, but overall quality wasn't high. Lucian commented that it was plain but lacked literary flair and originality. All right, that covers the third key point of this book, the evolution of ancient fiction from unconscious to conscious creation. We discussed that the emergence of Tang romances marked ancient fiction entering the conscious creation stage, making it an independent literary genre. Tang romances have high literary achievements, with the story of Yingling as an outstanding representative. The classical Chinese fiction of the Song Yuan periods continued the path of Six Dynasties, supernatural fiction, and Tang romances, but overall the quality wasn't high. All right, now let's talk about the fourth key point, the evolution of ancient fiction from classical to vernacular language. This evolutionary process began in the Song Yuan periods and was completed in the Ming Qing periods. Before the Song dynasty, ancient fiction was all in classical Chinese. By the Song and Yuan dynasties, vernacular fiction began to appear and fiction's readership expanded rapidly. Vernacular fiction of this period includes Huabin and Nihuabin. Hua is a performance form, yes, similar to later storytelling, and Huabin is the script used by storytellers. Inuaben is fiction created by literati imitating Huaben. Huban and Nihuban during the Song and Yuan periods were still mostly short stories, and their overall artistic quality wasn't high, but they changed the traditional way of writing fiction in classical Chinese and provided lots of novel material. They paved the way for the flourishing of long vernacular novels in the Ming and Qing dynasties, like the story of Xuanzang's journey in the Song era Great Tang records of the Western regions. The water margin story in the Song era Tales of the Swanhe era. The Yuan era's Pinghua of the Three Kingdoms laid the groundwork for the novels Journey to the West, Water Margin, and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, ancient fiction entered a prosperous stage dominated by long vernacular novels with very high achievements. We now often compare it to Tang poetry, Songsi, and Yuan drama. It has many genre types. Lucian classified them into historical novels, supernatural novels, human affairs novels, satirical novels, chivalry and court case novels, exposé novels, and more. Later researchers simplified it into four major categories: historical romance novels, heroic legends, supernatural novels, and romance novels. So next we'll focus on the human affairs novel, Jim Ping Mei, and the satirical novel, The Scholars. Jim Ping Mei is a human affairs novel, meaning it specifically portrays secular human relationships in a long novel form. It was mainly popular during the Ming and Qing dynasties, and historically, evaluations of Jim Ping Mei have always been controversial. Some think it's excellent. For example, Ming Dynasty literary giant Yuan Hongdao and modern writer Eileen Chang both praised it highly, considering it an outstanding realist novel. But others think it's a pornographic novel that corrupts minds and poisons society. So, how did Lucian evaluate Jim Ping Mei? Lucian believed that Jim Ping Mei was more realistic compared to earlier novels. It faces life directly, like in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Water Margin, Journey to the West. The protagonists are emperors, generals, chivalrous heroes, gods, demons, etc., far removed from our lives. Whereas the protagonist of Jin Ping Mei, Imin Ching, is a nouveau riche commoner, a local tycoon in the county, and someone you could see everywhere around you. The novel uses the affair between Ixmin Qing and Pan Jinlian as a backdrop to extensively depict various matters of food, drink, and relationships within the family. At the same time, centered around Nimin Qing's life, it expands outward, meticulously recreating the social customs and family relationships of the time, focusing on exposing the human degradation and ugliness brought by chasing money, power, and lust. Du Shun believed that Jinping Mei's exposure and critique of social customs are extremely profound. It focuses on the common society that was long neglected, showcasing the panorama of late Ming society, making it an outstanding realist novel. The erotic descriptions in Jinping Mei are what drew the most criticism. Of course, these explicit erotic depictions are indeed flaws and have a negative impact on young people. But Lucian also pointed out that this is largely related to the social atmosphere. Jinping Mei was written in the mid to late Ming Dynasty when the commercial economy saw significant development. People were obsessed with money, power, and sex, enjoying the pursuit of sensory stimulation. At that time, several emperors were also keen on sexual techniques. Many alchemists and officials gained high positions and wealth by presenting things like sexual manuals and erotic pictures to the emperor. As above, so below. The erotic culture among the common people became increasingly popular, leading to a large number of erotic novels. Compared to those purely erotic novels, Jinping Mei is roughly equivalent to the difference between erotic films and pornographic films today. It's not entirely vulgar. Moreover, the erotic content in the book is about 30,000 words. But Jinping Mei has over 1 million words. Denying this magnum opus because of 30,000 words is a bit of an overreaction. Therefore, Lu Shun pointed out that although Jinping Mei has some obscene words, its other merits remain, meaning that the flaws don't overshadow the virtues. It's a good book overall. Besides Jinping Mei, Lu Shun also highly praised the satirical novel The Scholars. This novel depicts various characters like feudal scholars, officials, wealthy gentry, and common ruffians regarding, different manifestations of fame and wealth. Lucian believed this novel exposes the decay of the feudal system and the ugliness of human nature, attacks the evils of the imperial exams, corruption in governance, and hypocrisy in Confucian rituals. It's like a mirror reflecting feudal society, earning very high praise. However, many scholars disagree with Lu Shen's evaluation. For example, Tian Zhangshu's opinion of the scholars is quite low. He said that the scholars has many instances of imitation and dependence, meaning that many stories, phrases, and rhetorical devices are borrowed from predecessors, lacking creativity. Additionally, the novel's cynical, wholesale rejection of the imperial exam system is somewhat biased. Lucian's evaluation of the scholars is indeed too high. So, why did Lucian have such a high opinion of the scholars? As mentioned earlier, Lucian highly valued fiction's social function, with a key criterion being whether it portrayed life, reflected reality, and critiqued it, a perspective strongly evident in A Brief History of Chinese Fiction. He especially praised satirical and expose novels like The Scholars and Revealing the Original Shape of Officialdom because, in his view, they exposed societal ills and darkness. For human affairs novels like Jinping Mei and Dream of the Red Chamber, Lu Xun commended their realism in depicting everyday life, but he rated supernatural novels like Journey to the West and Investiture of the Gods lower, believing they promoted superstition, poisoned minds, and harmed national spirit. This evaluative standard had historical context, but clear flaws, overemphasizing social function while neglecting literary aesthetics. All right, that concludes our final key point. The evolution of ancient fiction from classical to vernacular language and from short to long forms. During the Ming Qing period, ancient fiction flourished, transitioning from classical to vernacular. Lu Xun highly praised Ming Qing human affairs fiction like Jinping Mei, and satirical works like The Scholars. We've now covered Lu Xun's analysis of Chinese fiction's developmental patterns. Finally, let's briefly discuss his key academic achievements. First, he explored ancient Chinese fiction's evolutionary laws, established a research framework, and filled a scholarly void, immensely significant. He categorized fiction's development stages: origin, infancy, maturity, expansion, and flourishing. This categorization aligned with fiction's actual evolution and provided a blueprint for later scholars. Additionally, he classified fiction genres: historical, supernatural, human affairs, satirical, chivalric, expose, etc. Though imperfectly systematized, it broadly captured fiction's landscape. Most genre names remain in use today. Second, Lu Xun innovatively blended traditional Chinese scholarship with Western literary theory. And traditionally, he meticulously organized and cross-referenced vast ancient fiction sources. A brief history of Chinese fiction involves a vast amount of ancient fiction historical materials. To write this book, Lu Xun collected relevant materials everywhere. The collated ancient fiction historical materials alone amount to 500 or 600,000 characters. In addition to using traditional scholarly methods, Lu Xun also drew on advanced Western literary concepts. Regarding the definition of fiction, he believed that fiction is a literary work of certain length with strong fictionality and narrative. This is essentially the Western concept of the novel. Lu Xun used this concept to compare ancient Chinese fiction works, concluding that Tang romances are novels with modern significance. Third, this book is not detached from reality, purely academic. It has real social significance. The compilation of A Brief History of Chinese Fiction occurred shortly after the May 4th New Culture movement. Influenced by social trends and ideological currents of the time, Lu Xun emphasized the social function of fiction. Through fiction, Lu Xun critiqued national character to achieve the goal of social reform. Therefore, when analyzing the reasons for fiction's development and evaluating its achievements, he paid great attention to the connection between fiction and social life. For example, he highly praised Team Dynasty, human affairs novels, satirical novels, and expose novels because they featured realism and resistance struggles. Lu Xun regarded them as exemplars for overcoming national shortcomings. The book, A Brief History of Chinese Fiction, has profound influence and, together with Wang Guowei's History of Sun Yuan Drama, is hailed as one of the two arms in Chinese literary history. For nearly a century, it has been revered as a classic. Previously, Chen Pingyuan, head of Peking University's Chinese department, commented that, to this day, among fiction writers who write fiction history, Lu Xun's achievements remain the most outstanding. A Brief History of Chinese Fiction has been a research guide for countless later scholars. All right, that concludes our interpretation of this book, A Brief History of Chinese Fiction, for you. The listening notes are below the audio. We'll see you tomorrow.